Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 15th Best Practices Meet 2023. We have gathered here to delve into a critical and pressing topic that affects us all in the digital age, not letting that one issue be unaddressed, security operations and governance. I am Bhupesh Janoti and I am honored to guide you through this enlightening panel discussion over here. So as we understand, in this interconnected world, where data breaches, cyber threats, and vulnerability seems to be making headlines all too often, the importance of robust security operations and governance cannot be overstated. Our esteemed panelists are experts who have dedicated their careers to ensuring that organizations and individuals are well prepared to face the challenges of evolving digital landscape. Before we begin, let me take a moment to introduce our distinguished panelists. We have Mr. Jackson Fernandez with us, who is a Vice President, Information Security at Bangalore International Airport. Then we have Mr. Rishi Mehta, who is a SVP and CISO at HCL Technologies. We have Ms. Archana KS, VP Security Engineering at Wells Fargo and Startup Mentor at Nescom. We have Ms. Deepshika Mohapatro, who is the Director of Security Governance at Providence. Then we have Mr. Vinayaka BS, who is from Checkpoint. So our panelist brings a wealth of knowledge and practical insights to our discussion today. They will shed light on various aspects of security operations and governance, including the challenges organizations face, the strategies they employ to tackle security threats, the crucial role that effective governance plays in safeguarding the digital assets. Throughout the discussions, we encourage you, our esteemed audience, to actively engage with the conversations. So without further ado, let us dive into our panel discussion, not letting that one issue being unaddressed, security governance, security operations and governance. So I would request Jackson to please moderate the session and please take it from here. Thank you, Jackson.
Thank you, Bhupesh. Hello, hi, good evening, everybody, and apologies. We were expected to start a little bit more earlier, so I've been holding on to the panel members as best as possible. And what we are trying to, before I get into the meat of what we want to discuss, I just want to give each one of you a brief time to just introduce yourselves. Bhupesh has done the name and title, but a little bit more from each one of you if possible. Archana, why don't you start?
Hi, I'm Archana. I have an overall 17 years of experience in cybersecurity. Have worked in multiple domains in cybersecurity, like part of incident handling, leading a SOC, leading an SIM engineering team, and I was also an architect for one of the development organization where we designed the complete security presence while we were migrating from one organization to other. So this is a brief detail about it, and I'm with Wells Fargo right now for almost 2 years, and I lead an engineering team there. That's about it.
Thank you, Archana. Deepshika?
Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. I'm Deepshika. I have about 2 decades of experience in cybersecurity. Been in a couple of industries, GCC, I've been a part of healthcare, retail sector, as well as the financial sector. Again, like Archana, I managed a couple of different roles within cybersecurity. Currently, I'm the director for GRC within Providence, which is a healthcare organization, one of US larger not-for-profit hospital chain. And I look at security governance, ITDR, and a little bit of the Office of CISO as well. So that's me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Rishi. I'm the CISO for HCL Technologies. And we as a business, we are about 225,000 people across some 50 countries globally. And my job is essentially a pretty easy one, which is to help do business securely, right? And you can imagine that it's a lot of fun, but I'm happy to do that and share some experiences around it.
Thanks, Rishi. So my name is Vinayaka. I represent Checkpoint Software Technologies, having close to 2 decades of experience in cybersecurity per se, having been associated with some of the largest financial institutions, ITs institutions in the country, helping them in terms of their security journey, which is a continuous process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. And before, again, I mean, it's interesting that I heard everybody out here, and just among the ladies, 37 years of experience in cybersecurity, and we are in the cybersecurity domain just starting to talk about diversity and all of that. I mean, you guys have been way before anybody thought about diversity. You ladies have been in the cybersecurity field. So it's really, I think they deserve a round of applause for being ahead of the game there. So delving directly into, and I have a cheat sheet. Of course, I'm not going to remember everything, but don't worry, I haven't given them the questions, so they should be more impromptu. Having said that, one of the discussion topics about this is building effective security governance frameworks. So if I had to ask each one of you in turn, what are those two principles that you can think about that are the core of, let's say, developing a security governance framework? Why don't we start with Deepshika?
Thank you. I think a lot of people sometimes ask why governance, right? Governance is very fundamental to any organization. And if you have to look at two definitive principles, understand the nature of business that you're doing, figure out what you're doing as an organization, then base your governance fundamentals based on it. If you're into healthcare, know what are the regulations you have to follow. Look at what is your strategy, what's your 3-year roadmap. Base your governance based on those fundamentals. So strategy and the business that you operate in plays a very, very important role.
Thank you. Rishi, do you want to opine with a couple of principles that the audience should take?
Sure. It looks governance, of course, key and at the heart of pretty much what you do at security. But more than the principle, I think what it is not, what typically it gets confused with is, I don't think we should view governance as metrics. Governance is far more than that. And thus, if it is not just metrics, then what is it? In my mind, it is the ability to do something with the metric. So it is not about just the fanciest trend line and so on and so forth that we show, but how do you get it to a point of making that governance actionable, or something has to happen? Otherwise, there's probably no point of doing that. So firstly, I think just the ability to make it action-oriented is one thing that we would double-click on. And second, I think governance is not, like I guess other aspects of security, shouldn't be the governance team's job. It is the ability to bring in a consolidated viewpoint, a more democratized viewpoint across the group, not just from the security folks, but your partner teams. It could be infrastructure, it could be applications, or whoever else, the business teams, HR. And that input, or that consolidated input coming into governance, to me is the underlying fundamental principle of a good governance practice.
Thank you very much. I think, Rishi, you raised an interesting point around this, what it is not. So it's not just about the metrics, it's not just about a fancy dashboard. So for the people who come to us with fancy dashboards, are they out of a job now? I mean, if you put it that way?
Definitely not. I would think the baseline is the fancy dashboard, and it needs to look pretty. What I mean by that is, look, the foundation of mankind, humankind rather, is the ability to tell a story. The dashboard should tell a story, and we ought to give it for that, to build a story. But the point is, unless you add on to it to make it action oriented, for defining some control limits, what is good, what is not good, when does it go off the chart, what does that mean in terms of action? To me, that is what is where the real value lies. So to your point, yes, the foundation is with the dashboard, but unless you kind of top it up with making it action-oriented, to me, it's just a dashboard then.
Wonderful. Archana, if I can come back to you, what goes in your dashboards? What are the principles that stand out, let's say, in a dashboard that you would like to present to management?
Yeah, so first is, as Deepshika mentioned, it is important to understand business strategies. What is the key area of interest? So in my dashboard, I would like to know what are the emerging threats for the industry that we see, and to ensure that our security controls are in place to safeguard our environment, to ensure that we are safe from those kind of threats. And also, if it should also cover any gaps that are there, and that should go as an input back to the security teams to enhance the security. So that goes as a key because it's not just a dashboard with certain metrics, but it should also cover what is the threat landscape and how well we are able to protect our organization assets.
Understood. I think, Vinayaka, I'll come to you. I think the three panelists have touched upon few of the key principles, like Deepshika touched on strategy, business alignment. Archana did speak about, the visibility of threats and all of that. How do I make it all happen in a slide? How do I operationalize this? Principles are on a piece of paper.
Okay, I think, it's slightly tricky there because we're talking about compliance, we're talking about operational efficiency, and we're also talking about risk management, right? The one thing that I liked about what Archana said is in terms of threat. How do you continuously monitor threat? And how do you use the tools available today in terms of AI or ML? And how do you automate and prevent these threats? So if you can have a robust framework, probably a derivative of a zero trust framework according to your organizational needs or your verticals, and then build on top of it with AI and ML, then definitely I think you can go a long way in terms of blocking those threats and having an operational supremacy.
I will play the devil's advocate over here a bit because you mentioned a few things, and it is common parlance in the cybersecurity domain today.
Yep.
When we talk about zero trust, when we talk about AI, ML, and I don't want the audience to tune out thinking here's another slew of terms that cybersecurity professionals on a panel are going to throw this out. So let's say if I had to pick up, what is that one thing, let's say out of all of these principles that we talked about, strategy, visibility, transparency on the threats and everything, if I had to say that you can show only one thing, what would you show?
I would definitely show the operational efficiency part of it.
Operational efficiency. What about you, Deepshika? If that one thing within the security governance framework that you absolutely cannot work without, out of all of the principles?
I would look at the risk score. And what is the risk metrics for the organization? Where are we right now? Because a lot of time we take decisions based on frameworks, on fundamental policies, but are we even tracking the risk that we are seeing from all these dashboards that's coming together? Do we go back and put a number on it and say that this is where we were last year, this is everything we've done this year as initiatives? Are we trending upwards or downwards? Is that risk coming down for the organization? Was all those initiatives and projects we invested in bringing value back to the organization? So I think risk scoring plays an important mechanism around the whole governance.
So, Rishi, risk score plays a very important thing. If I assign a risk score to every little threat out there, can I handle everything?
I think this is an area where more is definitely not good. And thus, the conversation is not about, let me like extend my arms over everything that I can possibly find, and hopefully, it helps me in that process. But I think the ability to understand, and we spoke about it earlier when we talked about the business context, the ability to really define what are those 3, 4, 5, 6 processes in the organization, which are like my crown jewel, and I'm using the word carefully, processes, not the app or infra behind it, because that's the underlying layer, but what does my business really need, right? And then you map it back into that process to identify, thus, my risk score on X. So for example, if my ability to hire is key to my business, much more than anything else, my ability to keep my hiring engine running is, let's assume, a crown jewel process. Then if I then work backward into assigning what are the underlying infrastructure, applications, so on and so forth, other processes, and put a risk score there, I think that to me is where you build that business connect. And if the only other thing I'd add is that, look, we all talk about reducing the attack surface area and all of that, right? And which is a good thing, we should obviously do that. But I also feel that within security, this alert fatigue thing is only going to get worse. It's not going to get any better. And we are ingesting much more than what we've ever done in the past. The ability to really spend the time and effort to cull out what we need from there, I think is a key factor of success today.
Wonderful. You mentioned about alert fatigue and all. Before I come to you, Archana, with the last question, I just want an audience poll on this. Vinayaka mentioned AI, ML. Rishi did mention about alert fatigue, and we know about AI/ML. How many of you feel AI/ML is the solution to what Rishi just mentioned? Just a show of hands that AI/ML will solve our alert fatigue that we have in cybersecurity. Anybody? 50%? I think I see 5 hands in the audience. Only 5 people think AI/ML is actually going to work for us.
Not even 5%.
5 people, 5 people. Okay. Sorry? Sorry? Nobody thinks that way. Okay, let's put it this way. AI/ML is supposed to be a great boon for us. Is it a great threat for us? How many see AI/ML as a huge threat for us in the upcoming for cybersecurity? Oh, it's bigger. So more than opportunities, we see threats. And that is the question coming back to you, Archana. You mentioned in your dashboards the threat visibility and everything. Yeah. So is that going to be the most important, that one thing, no matter what else I show in a deck, but I need to show threat visibility? Is that the one thing you will go with?
Yeah, definitely. The threat visibility is an important factor because if we don't have visibility, how do we safeguard our critical assets? Without that visibility, it is very difficult to understand the threat landscape or define any kind of governing mechanism to safeguard the critical assets. So it is very important that we should be aware of the threats that are coming up with the emerging technologies. What are we expecting? Watching out the APT groups. Are we targeted? How well should we be prepared is the key to ensure that we are safe.
Wonderful. So I think this then nicely dovetails into our second part of the conversation, which is more around security operations. So, what's better? I mean, I think this will be a very short answer. Running a SOC in-house or outsource? What's better? We'll start with Rishi.
It's a million-dollar question. I think it's different strokes for different folks. We are in the business of running SOCs for plenty of our customers, by the way. So there's no question of not having the ability to kind of outsource it. But my internal SOC, I run, of course, myself, and that works out well as well. I think the question is, what do you define as readiness to run the SOC? Do you have the right set of skills, tools, processes to be able to do that? And I don't think it is a one and done thing. It is a journey where you are on. And do you need, like any other area, do you need a third party to help you scale and get to mitigate that threat at that point in time? 2 years later, you may choose to do something differently, and that's perfectly fine as well. So to me, it's more about being self-aware of what you need, and then doing the right activity, whether it is outsourcing or building it in-house to mitigate those areas of threat, Jackson.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rishi. Deepshika, coming to you. Outsource or insource? What do you want to do?
No, I think I'm going to agree with Rishi. It's a twofold answer. It could be either ways. Coming from a service industry, yeah, we've managed SOCs for a lot of clients. But again, when we are a healthcare, we want to do it in-house. We feel we have the competency, we have the team, and so it's again the business and how much you feel you're ready to handle that responsibility. So right now, I say in-house.
Thank you. Vinayaka, can we run a fully automated SOC if I'm outsourcing it to, reduce, cost optimize, all that stuff?
Okay, see, running a SOC should not be associated with cost optimization because security is paramount, point number one. The second aspect I would say is probably to run a hybrid SOC. So you have operations in-house plus you leverage the expertise of the security experts plus bring in the threat modeling, have a baseline and all the AI and ML again that I spoke to. So if you approach this with a hybrid approach, definitely I think you'll go a long way and you can completely automate. For example, today's threats can be looked into and automated in the sense that you push a policy, ensure that the thread is already blocked and then alert the administrator. So, like the peace with which, you sleep in the night is, like sanctified. So that's what I would say. Yes, the answer is yes.
Thank you, and that raises an interesting question for you, Archana. Shouldn't worry about cost optimization when you're running a SOC. So, do you have a blank check?
No, definitely not. So definitely cost comes into picture because when we build a solution, we need to get the blessings of the leadership. So if we get XYZ budget, does it get approved? On what basis? That matters a lot. So when we talk about the experience in security, most of the times, getting the anticipated budget is always a question. So we need to have a right answer to what is the need for such a huge budget? So that makes sense.
I think I can make the audience exercise their hands with this question because I think it's a given. How many here who are in cybersecurity feel that they have enough budget to manage the threats out there? Absolutely, wonderful. Anyways, now coming back to another part about, from what we are seeing today, the environment that we have today, are we truly prepared for an attack, or is it just about managing resilience today? That so so Archana, the question to you is, are we looking past trying to defend, prevent, to just managing resilience? Is that what we are at today?
I would say mostly yes, because the emerging threats, many of the threats are unknown for many organizations. So we talk about zero-day threats in today's world. So we are moving from reactive towards proactive, but however, we have a lot to do because the threats landscape is changing every day, and we need to be prepared. And when you talk about cyber resiliency, when you talked about cyber resiliency, it's a need of the hour for many organizations because of these unknown factors. It is very important that we have a plan of action if there is a security threat outbreak. The business has to be ready. We need to ensure that we have a path to get back to business. That is where cyber resiliency is kicking importance, and we need to have an action plan to see how quickly we can resume back our services.
It all begins by looking at, what are your crown jewels? What are the things that you have to recover at the earliest? Build a structure in place that goes back and points at those basic fundamentals. If you're into healthcare, okay, patient life support. These are your systems. These are your crown jewels. If you're into retail, how soon can you bounce back into business? And based on those, go back and create your resiliency structure. Know the basic fundamentals that you need to be able to pull back your business on time and build around it. Because no point are you going to say that, I am so strong enough that I will not be compromised. Understand, if you are compromised, how soon do you want to be able to recover and bounce back?
Wonderful. Vinayaka, if I can come to you, what solace as a OEM provider can you offer to the panelists? We are going to get breached. It is inevitable. Maybe we don't know we've been breached.
Okay, amazing question, Jackson. I think it sets a solid framework because if organizations realize that nobody is immune, then it makes our job as an OEM much more easier. But when we look into this, we always advise the customers that, see, security is a continuous process. You need to have a playbook. You need to continuously monitor. And also you need to be better prepared in terms of handling incidents. And you cannot look at who can come in and what are the steps that you will take. So there has to be a framework that should be there. And then based on that, you can always improve. The best part is, since we deal with cybersecurity incidents on a daily basis, we have experts available for incidents response at any point of time, where we can help you in terms of quickly mitigating that risk, also providing you with an entry point as to from where the threat came in and how do you actually prevent it in future. That's what.
So essentially IR services.
Essentially IR services, you can say.
Okay.
Yep.
Wonderful. Then you probably should be handing out your business card also to a few people here.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you.
Rishi, coming towards now, all of these frameworks and everything is more voluntary, not mandatory, but regulatory is becoming mandatory. How does this affect us, and especially considering, how all of our sectorial regulators are getting more and more active. And most recently, and this is quite a circumstance that the DPDP bill has also been finalized and we are at a DSCI event. So how does a regulatory framework have impositions on cybersecurity in what you implement?
Sure. So I think it's a good thing that the regulators are rising to the reality of what's going on around us. Look, if you look at it thematically, there are a couple of streams that you see across these regulations. One, there is a expectation of minimum baseline controls, so to say, whether it's around privacy, around security, and so on and so forth. So there's an expectation that, hey, you'll adhere to some good practices and so on and so forth. But also, increasingly so, you're seeing a lot of focus on incident reporting. That if something were to go wrong, if something were to happen, certain says, hey, 6 hours, you need to let us know. SEBI has their own viewpoint, and of course, regulators across the globe have their own perspective. I think the first one ties in second, primarily into our prevent side of the equation, right? We're saying, hey, how do I prevent attacks and so on and so forth. But the second one is more a part of the resilience in my mind that you spoke about. So when you look at resilience broadly, you talk about pre-breach, during breach, post-breach, kind of an ecosystem. And thus, not just having the ability to understand that, Jackson, but in my mind, the ability to test it out on a as regular basis as you do things like, vulnerability assessments and stuff like that, right? The ability to simulate and test those resilience frameworks, I think, is going to be critical. And to your point, Vinayak, then, as end user organizations, hopefully, thankfully, you do not end up seeing so many incidents that you need to learn from. So you don't learn from your own incidents, but your ability to simulate and learn from incidents that are happening across the globe, I think, is going to be key for you to build a good, solid framework around it.
Thank you, Rishi. I think Rishi just mentioned something very controversial over here, learning from others' mistakes. I mean, really, I think...
I'll tell you why I say that. When I say, all of us, we I think as an industry, we are definitely not comfortable in sharing a lot about what's not going well in our organizations and so on and so forth. Having said that, there is still a lot of public information that is out there that we can consume in a much better way. And not just in the form of IOCs and so on and so forth. I'm not talking about those guys. I'm talking about really in-depth analysis of what does that mean for us? And thus, I want to use the word simulate it. Test it out in your environment. Ingesting the IOC is probably just one part of that process, but if you're not looking at it end to end, I think that's a missed opportunity.
Thank you. Deepshika, from you, regulatory and the impact. So especially since you are in the healthcare side, so I'm assuming there's a bit of regulatory impositions even when it comes to cyber. How does this impact you?
Oh, yes, I think it is also needed. I agree that, there is an impact. There are things that you have to build keeping in mind the regulations, but it is also the need of the hour, because the more we are doing advancement in technology, the more we are trying to bring in everything that can possibly come in. There has to be some control around it. And for healthcare, HIPAA plays a very important role for us. PCI DSS then plays an important role. There are multiple frameworks that we have to look at. But again, if you see from where all these started, it was there to protect the patient data. It was there to create that level of privacy. So I think the regulatory requirements have been brought into account to have some sense of responsibility with the organization. It does constrain us, but it is some part that we have to be very conscious about and build our business around it. I think DPDP is something that we've been working since 2017, and I think finally it's there. GDPR, when it was done in Europe, there were a lot of impact that we saw and we learned from. And rightly, like Rishi mentioned, there's a lot to learn from what you see available in the media and the news. Within the marketing space, there is so much that's being done. The innovation that comes in over there, looking at the time a customer spends, looking at an ad, you can go back and decide what all to position. And then GDPR went and put some regulations saying how much can you go into that space? Do you protect the privacy? So I think regulation plays a very key element. And as security professional, I think we have to go back and ensure that we are also building around those guidelines and protecting. We are having an interesting discussion today saying encrypt everything. And the reverse is HIPAA says that if someone wants data de-encrypted, you have to give it to them if that patient wants. So I think security has to play that balance between what's needed from a organization or industry standard versus what the regulatory requirements are.
Thank you very much. Archana, coming to you, I mean, BFSI is known to be the regulator, at least on the BFSI side, is expected to be very close to the action. And so how different is let's say, the regulatory framework from a best practice in a BFSI domain? And do you have to do much more than what is required by the regulator?
I would say, that I would like to agree with you that at times, even being compliant, we may be susceptible to certain risk. So being compliant with the regulators gives in the confidence within the business that we are ready to face any kind of security threat. But there may be situations that may arise wherein that might not be enough as well, because there are a lot of unknowns in the world of threat. So it is very important that we test our security controls periodically and ensure that the right set of controls are in place.
Wonderful. Vinayak, I'll come to you with this. Is it easier to define the framework for governance, or is it easier to implement it?
I would say, like both are difficult, but
You get to pick one.
okay, from an implementation standpoint, it's easier rather than, like framing it. I would like to put it that way, because there is a set framework which has been provided. Obviously, you can't go wrong with it, and then you start developing on it. And as the aspect, which Rishi also said, right? You learn from others' mistakes, look at improving the baseline, and make it a continuous habit. That's what I would say. Implementation.
Implementation. Dipshika, what would you say to this?
I feel when you build your framework, do not complicate it. Sometimes you want to adhere to everything. You say, okay, my nature of business is this. I fall under this framework. I also want to go ahead. I have government contracts. I also want to follow this. So the more you complicate your framework, it's going to be that difficult to go back and implement it. So understand the fundamentals and keep it at a level where it's easy to be implemented. If not, you're going to struggle. You'll have an amazing looking framework, which will be very difficult to be able to implement.
So designing would be key, and
Designing
it would be
is
more
key.
difficult than actually implementing it.
Designing is key.
All right, fine, great. Rishi, your thoughts on it? Designing a framework or implementing it?
I think both are equally easy. The difficult part is adapting to it, making it adaptable. Now you could call it implementation or design, either ways. But the ability to keep it nimble, for it to change with something that is changing internally or externally, to me that's where usually you see a lot of struggle, you see a lot of resistance, a lot of inertia to change, and that to me is probably much more important.
All right, Archana, last one. Implementing or designing the framework, which is more difficult?
I agree with the point that designing is more important, but when it comes to implementations, getting the right set of approvals for implementing the controls, having the agreement with the business, that plays an important role, because every organization structure is different, the mindset is different. If the organization is not happy with the implementation, definitely it's going to be a tough task.
I'm actually interested. She said designing, but then she spoke all on Vinayak's point on actually implementing being difficult. All right, so then starting from Vinayak onwards and working your way towards me, I think seeing as we are at the top of the hour, give me one governance initiative or one security operations initiative you want the audience to absolutely implement. It could be either a governance principle that you think is key for this, or you think one operational requirement that they have to, one security operations initiative that they absolutely have to do.
So I would say, just, to summarize whatever, like the panel said, have a clear framework in place first. And once you have a clear framework, then operationalizing it will be very easy. In operations part, I would probably pick this time the compliance, because that's where, like you can check where exactly you are and look at plugging the deviation. That's what I would say.
Wonderful. Rishi, your thoughts?
Recent book I read, 50 Lies That Shaped the World. The essence is an incident or a story is just a story. It's from somebody's perspective. The amount of time as a metric that you spend on implementing the learnings from an incident, not the mean time to control, not the mean time to contain and all of that as standard metrics, but the learnings that you've spent on the incident, to me, that is a metric. If I would suggest that we look at it, if you don't already do it.
Thank you.
I think when you're implementing a governance framework, don't just think about your organization. Look at it end to end. Look at the third parties that you work with. Look at the whole TPRM process. Because if you just keep it to your organization and say that, okay, I have secured myself, my framework works really great within my organization, then you're leaving a lot of gaps. And look at it end to end and see how you can focus on all the different aspects through which there could be risk or there could be exposure to your organization.
Thank you. Finally, Archana,
Yeah.
what is the one governance or security operations initiative?
So one security operations initiative I would like to talk about is have a regular simulatory exercise where you test your controls, you understand how well the team is prepared to respond in case of a real incident, work through the timelines, check if we are able to have a right response on time, and how ready the team is. Based on the output, plan the trainings for the team to ensure that we are ready to handle any kind of security incident.
Wonderful. Thank you. And that led...
Your view on it as well.
He was waiting to do that to me. No, from my side, I think I actually want to pick up. So since I'm the moderator, I get to cheat a bit more. So I want to pick up from each one of you guys. The thing is, when you implement something, knowing and understanding the business you're implementing it to is supremely important for me. Because at the end of the day, like Deepshika mentioned, she talked about a risk score. And if I go back and tell in my business, I come from an airport, I talk about a threat which is never going to be a likely threat for my business, my management is going to think that I'm, to put it charitably, cuckoos, What's he talking about when this is not even relevant to the business? So I think whether you're implementing a security framework, a governance framework, or an security operations initiative, its relevance to your business is going to be supremely in this thing. And when I say relevance to your business, I'm taking a leaf again from what Deepshika said. It doesn't mean just your organization. It means the entire value chain up and down. So I think that's my parting. Thank you, Rishi. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. If you have any questions, please do ask. Otherwise, you know who we are. We've been boring you for the last 40 minutes. So you can also, yes, please. We have one audience member.
First of all, thank you so much for an amazing conversation. I have a question for you, Rishi. You mentioned about what's really important is to measure the learnings, after the incident. How do you measure that? Is something that I would be really interested in understanding.
Sure, good question. Hey, listen, so the ability, so for example, do you have a cadence where when you have X category of incidents, and by this I don't mean only critical incidents and so on and so forth, but you define the parameters. Do you have a structured cadence where a set of people, which is a cross-functional team, are coming together to review what that CAPA is, what that corrective action, preventive action is, and then publishing it as formalized next steps is a way that we use to build that metric. The point that I was alluding to was we can look at it at a very operational sense and say incident open, incident close, and thus mean time to recover, mean time to contain, and so on and so forth. But the ability to dive deeper is it's an opportunity missed if you don't do that. So whatever works best, but I think it's an important metric to look at.
Absolutely agree. Thank you for great insights.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rishi. Any other further questions from the audience? Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you to my esteemed panel members. It was wonderful having you on stage, and stay connected. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jackson, for the wonderful moderation and keeping us safe while flying out of Bangalore. Yeah.
Thank you, all
Thank
the
you.
panelists and all the audience.